Karibuni. It's good to be back with you all. Wana Kumbukeni, welcome to our episode today. We'll be talking about Ghana. Just before we start, I would like to make an announcement in support of one of Kumbukeni's good friends, a family who have committed generations to the struggle for the liberation of Africans globally. Speaking of the Walter Rodney Foundation, and please support them. This coming Friday, March 24th, from 4:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, they will have their annual symposium in Atlanta, Georgia. You can visit their website for more information at https. I will share it in the banner. If I can pull that up quickly, right there. You can support them at that website. Just click on the website. You'll get more information on the symposium and how you can register for it. There will be a virtual option. At the symposium, they'll be premiering the movie Walter Rodney, and the movie will not be shown on the virtual option. So for those of you who want to watch the movie, please make your way to Atlanta, Georgia, and support our good friend, our good friends, Walter Rodney family. Thank you. So, Brother Alimadi, Brother Adesoji, welcome. And yes, indeed. I'll let you introduce yourselves before we start on our topic today.
From New York City, Milton Alimadi. Happy always to be with my comrades here, spreading African knowledge, recalling our past, and tying it with our contemporary challenges. The solutions are out there. Our ancestors knew the solutions. Let's embrace them. So that's why we come here to commune or to ground with our sisters and brothers every week. Thank you.
Indeed. Adesoji.
Well, Adesoji Ginla from the center of the capital of former empire, and still
the land of the oppressors.
Yes.
The land of the imperialists.
I have to keep reminding them. Yes.
Listen.
The heart of the Commonwealth, and yes.
Oh, you could even say the heart of darkness.
That's a good one.
No. We did spread light. So we gave you the 3 C's: Christianity, commerce, and civilization.
Because we were so very primitive.
And you're also speaking English, by the way. So
listen, hata sitaki kujua mambo hayo sasa.
But he has a good point. I was watching this documentary, and what's the documentary? I think it's Zambia Under the Influence of China, made by France 24. And the cab driver, the Zambian, was complaining that all the signs are now in Chinese. And I didn't realize he was complaining in English.
Listen, our minds have been so colonized, we don't even realize it. It's unfortunately sad. All right. Thank you, brothers. My name is Nduku. I am one of the co-hosts. I am an African sister working with my brothers to counter the false narrative that the Western media has propagated on Africa for years and years. So today we're going to be talking about one of the African nations that led Africa towards independence, and an African leader that promoted unity in Africa and made a lot of headway in inspiring Africans in many ways. I'm speaking on Ghana. Yes. Brother Adesoji.
You need to pronounce it with the right intonation.
Please do correct me.
It's called Ghana.
Ghana. That sounds very English. That sounds very imperialist.
But it's in London. What do you expect?
Listen. So, Brother Adesoji, we'll start with you. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us and supporting Kumbukeni. What did Ghana's independence in 1957 mean for Africa?
Well, let's go by the speech delivered by the legend that is Kwame Nkrumah, when he said, Ghana's independence means nothing if the other countries around Ghana still dependent, are still colonies. So let this be the beacon of freedom to all other African countries. And not only said it, he lived it, he practiced it. So in that sense, Ghana's independence I would say opened the doors for so many others,
Mhm.
either by negotiation or by, as Malcolm X will say, any means necessary. And they Ghana really did put their hearts, put their minds and their resources at the disposal of every African country that yearned for independence. And true to it, the 60s was just littered with African country after African country, getting its independence. In some cases, it was just flagged independence, but it was independence all the same.
Mhm.
So in my mind, I will go back to giving the giving Ghana their due flowers, due respect, to saying not only were they led by one of the greatest Africans that has ever lived, but also the fact that even up till today, Ghana still remains that beacon of
Mhm.
hope and freedom, as exemplified by the year of return.
Yes.
Can you imagine if every other country on that west coast did a year of return?
Mm.
You know, I
And not
would
just the West Coast, but the East Coast as well, all over Africa.
exactly,
That would be
exactly,
amazing.
exactly.
Again, they're
So
leading us in every step.
yeah,
Brother Alimadi, what difference, what significance did Ghana's independence have?
Well, I want to echo from Brother Desoji's observation. He's completely correct. He did say that the independence of Ghana was meaningless unless the rest of Africa was decolonized. And that was significant because he did not have to take that position.
Mhm.
mm,
He knew that that was a hostile position to imperialism.
mhm, mhm,
And ultimately, of course, he paid the price for that position.
Yeah.
He could have easily said, these are powerful countries. Let me let them protect me, right? But that's not why he had fought for independence.
mm,
He wanted to help transform Africa, not just Ghana. He had lived in the United States as well,
Mhm.
another belly of the beast. So he knew the history. He knew the reality on the ground. He knew the mistreatment of African peoples and descendants of Africa. He had lived it. It was not just on theory for him. So the
mm.
importance of liberating all of Africa was critical. He was instrumental in forming the African liberation committees within the Organization of African
African
Unity,
unity. Yeah.
which of course preceded the African Union. And those committees, yes, many African countries are divided on many, many issues. Of course, very divided on the issue of the United States of Africa. But one
Mhm.
thing they were never divided on, the need to liberate all of Africa from European colonialism. And the liberation committees were very effective. You know, when it comes to making the annual contribution, the general contribution to the African Union, many of the African countries slack off. But when it came to contributing to the Liberation Committee, they gave the money, they gave
Everyone's
on,
the
paycheck was on time.
on
exactly
time.
the intellectual expertise, the organizing, and that's ultimately, of course, resulted in the successful liberation of Angola,
Mhm.
Mozambique, Namibia, and ultimately South Africa itself, and
Yes.
Guinea-Bissau and the other colonies. They were on one page when it came to that. So I echo what our brother Desoji said. And then, of
Yeah.
course, the other big thing was to go to the question, what did it mean for Africa?
Mhm.
It opened the possibilities. Now we can control our own destiny, decide on our political outlook, decide on our economic outlook, and what kind of society we want to create. Obviously, much of that remained on paper,
Yeah.
and that has been the challenge for the last 60 years for most African countries and for Ghana, 66 years.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because I have a question as I was doing my research, one of the books I was looking at, but I'll hold off on that question for now. As you both talk about, Brother Milton, I think you mentioned that Nkrumah went to school in the United States. He also went to the UK to
Yep.
study there, and he was very active in the liberation movement in both countries. But the thing that reminds me, or rather the thing that comes to mind that I can relate to, is that fact that you go into the belly of the beast, and that's where you realize exactly how these people, these oppressors, treat us, treat your brothers and sisters, and it doesn't matter where you are in the, which is why we are doing the work we are doing, because by being in the midst of them, we hear what they say about Africa. We see what they do about Africa. We see how they treat Africans in the United States and in the UK. And I think it's an awakening moment for any true freedom fighter from anywhere when you come into these spaces and you see exactly how they behave. So the second question, it's getting into Nkrumah. Once he gets independence and he's excited to jump in as the leader, I've been watching the videos. He's very excited. He's crying. He's singing. He's dancing. What challenges does he face? This is the first country in Africa. The imperialists have been hit because they're losing one control over one country in Africa, at least some control. So what I'm sure they have some resistance. They push back rather. What challenges does Nkrumah face after independence?
Well, two really. Two immediately jumps out. One is, if you look at the man, you will understand what challenge he faced. First and foremost, Nkrumah wasn't an elitist. Nkrumah was a village boy. Nkrumah was poor. So in living in England, he lived in a room in Edgware, just countryside here. And his landlord said, or his landlord at the time, an English lady said, he was completely unremarkable. But the people that knew him, i.e., when he went to West London, where the likes of Mugabe, the likes of Kamodu, Banda, Hastings were living, he was much more vibrant because he was amongst his peers. So I think where he would have come into the consciousness of the West was when he went and did what Brother Walter Rodney did, was going to Speaker's Corner to speak. The moment you do that, you effectively put a bullseye on your back. So what then transpired was, when he went back home, he immediately had to justify himself to the ruling class, because here was someone not of their ilk, but he was in tune with the people. The imperialists will see that as a problem, because most of the people who came out to study were elitist in themselves. So they ascribed to whatever the colonialists wanted in terms of how they move back and forth. So the moment he came in, so he was going to battle them, and he was also going to be battling the outside. As in the course of our conversation, we will see how that plays out. But that was effectively the problem he was facing. The moment, I think even that tears was probably saying, what have I gotten myself into here? Because it was almost like you knew what was coming next. And I'm sure Brother Milton will add to what I've just said, in the sense that even on that stage, you could see the people next to him were people who chimed with him. But then the moment he started, interfacing with the people in the parliament, the opposition, he knew he had a fight on his hand. Not just at convincing them, but also getting them to see that whatever it is he wins is not a win for Nkrumah, or not a win for the CPP, but a win for the CPP, being the Congress of People's Party, that he was a win for the entire Ghana.
Yes.
And by extension, maybe Africa at that time, because he was a leader like no other, because he thinks in 3 steps: one, the people, the country,
Right.
then Africa. People, country, Africa. That was how he was thinking. If you read any of his speeches, it is there clear. That was his mindset. It was people, country, Africa. So,
Brother Milton, on the same subject of the challenges that Nkrumah faced, Nkrumah believed in a United States of Africa, and he pushed for that. He believed that the new states could achieve real independence and throw off the neo-colonialists of the former imperial powers if they united. Could you please speak to this? What challenges he fought? Who fought him back? If you can remember exactly who did, and why they fought him back on the idea of uniting Africa.
Okay, first, also, I want to echo a little bit on what Brother Desoji said in terms of his background. Of course, was very important in who he became. And in fact, when he was going to Lincoln University, HBCU here in the United States, historically Black college, in the summer, he would come and work in Harlem, washing dishes, working in factories, all these odd jobs, obviously survive, that many Africans who don't come from elitist background also have to go through. So that was critical in his formation. And Desoji is right in that they probably had a file on him very early when he was making those public speeches in London, in the park, just like Sister Patricia Rodney told us. They had also opened a file, intelligence file, on Walter Rodney, because while he went to university in London, he was also making those public speeches.
So freedom of speech is not quite free.
Freedom of speech is there for others, not for everybody.
Some speeches are equal than others.
Exactly.
Are you quoting Animal Farm, Adesoji?
So then when he comes to Ghana, he's embraced by the elite who are in the leadership of the United Gold Coast Convention, the party of the elite, the lawyers, the doctors, the accountants, the early educated Ghanaians. And they want him to be the Secretary General. But he sees that these are folks who like the ostentatious type of living. Their main complaint was that the British were keeping them outside the door. You see? And he said, this is not for me. I need to connect to the masses, have a broad base. So he quits the party. And as Adesoji says, he forms with other colleagues, the Convention People's Party, the CPP, a party of the broad masses. And they go to the masses that most people look upon contemptuously, including our own African elite, unfortunately. And that is how he's able to be elected the first prime minister. In fact, the opposition comes from the very beginning, before he's even the leader. When the British lock him up and accuse him of inciting violence, because they see he's connecting with the masses, not the elite, who like to be going around in the tailored British suits. So they saw him as somebody who would be dangerous in the future, somebody they would not be able to control. And they locked him up. But while he's in jail, he wins his seat for parliament. And his party wins the most seats in the pre-election pre-independence election that they had. So they have to release him, and becomes what they call at the time the chief minister, sort of a prime minister, but you are not in charge of foreign affairs or defense. You're only in charge of everything else except foreign affairs, I think, and defense.
He played a smart. Sorry to cut you. He played a smart one on the British there, in the sense that there was a rule at the time that if you serve in a jail term of over 2 years, then you can't contest. But because the sedition case they put against him was for less than a year,
They were not smart enough.
Slid through.
That is what happens when you're street smart. You understand the rules. You read when you read.
You better
I mean,
keep that on the down low, Adisodi, just in case you alert them to that. We don't want new legislation.
Yeah.
so
Go on.
But to go to the other part of your question, his main enemies, his main people who opposed him the most were the people who did not want somebody to challenge capital and capitalism. And of course, the powers that be are worried that once you have a United States of Africa, they'll be in a very strong position to actually dictate the direction they want. They would no longer be able to be manipulated like China. China used to be the playing ground for Western imperialism, British, American, before the Chinese Revolution, when China started to become a powerful state. It was not initially, but the minute it was able to organize the way it wanted to organize Chinese society, at that point, they knew they could no longer manipulate China. So China then spent all this time building its economy, and that's how China became China. The same thing for what became the Soviet Union. When they broke from the capital and they formed their society, they were weak in the beginning, but the fact that they had formed the Soviet Union meant they could no longer be manipulated. And they realized the same thing would happen in Africa. The United States of Africa would still be weak in the beginning, but this is the beginnings of power, because now you can't just come and invade and take what you want, because they would be able to have a united armed force for the entire continent. And that is why essentially they made sure that Nkrumah did not last long in power.
Brother Alimadi, are you saying that Africa can learn a thing or two from China?
Oh, that is a sad thing. The sad thing is that we are so mesmerized in Western worshiping that we don't see lessons from the past. And I've used this example many times, and I remind people again. In 1959, 1960, the per capita income of China was 90 US dollars. Ghana's was almost 200, about 189. Today, Ghana is more than 2,500, which is high by other African country standard. Uganda, for example, is 800, but China today is more than 15,000. And China today is, of course, a superpower. So that just gives you the example that we should learn from the countries that were once economically and politically weak, like we were and still are, and adopt some of the lessons that they pursued to build up their politics and their economies.
Yeah. As I'm getting ready to move on to industrializing Africa, but before we do, I want to read something that I came across, because I'm thinking of Nkrumah being imprisoned because he's doing what most of us consider the right thing, defending his people. And this comes up now in many ways, where you have some organizations that will remain nameless raiding African organizations just because they are fighting for liberation, jailing Africans in the United States, in Africa, and everywhere on the globe. We have Assata Shakur, who's been hiding in Cuba for years for something she did not do, just because she's fighting for human rights and the rights of her people. So as I was doing my research, one of the books I was looking at is White Malice by Susan Williams.
Yes.
And one of the chapters, and
that book is lethal,
that is perfectly titled is Hands Off Africa. Chapter 4, Hands Off Africa, exclamation mark. And it's about the conference in Accra, the All African Peoples Conference that Nkrumah, with all his foresight, had immediately after independence. Like the next year after independence, Nkrumah is like, let me call my brothers and sisters. We need to plan how we're going to expand this liberation movement. And one of the so they sit, they meet, they get to know each other, because a lot of them haven't met each other face to face. and then they sit down and actually strategize, and they come up with resolutions, written resolutions, which Tom Mboya, who was hosting or was he master of ceremony, we call him, the conference, reads at the end. And one of the resolutions that stood out to me, I wanted to read out to everyone, just to either inspire those who are afraid, to inspire the leaders in Africa so that you can stand up for what is right. Hopefully I get through to one of you. Yes. So it says, Mboya read out the resolutions. One of them tackled neatly the controversy over the use of violence, which had been the focus of debate ever since Fanon's speech. So Fanon, the conference is founded on non-violence, but Fanon, being who he is, comes out and says, to hell with that.
No, Fanon came from the FLN.
Yes.
At the time, he was representing the FLN, so there was no way he was going to speak without speaking to the idea of violence.
Yes. So they are fighting. They are at war. And so he comes in and he says, go ahead, Adesoji.
So for those who are not aware, the FLN was the resistance in Algeria against French domination.
Yes.
So continue.
So he comes in, and there's no way he's going to be sitting there with the non-violence business. And he comes in with a Malcolm X spirit. He's like, to hell with you all. I need to be at violence. And this is what this is what the resolution. Finally, they sit down after Fanon gives his speech. They all talk about it. And this is the resolution that they agree to. The resolution took a pragmatic approach, declaring its full support to all fighters for freedom in Africa. And quote, this is the resolution: to all those who resort to peaceful means of non-violence and civil disobedience, as well as to all those who are compelled to retaliate against violence to attain national independence and freedom for the people. Where such retaliation becomes necessary, the conference condemns all legislations which consider those who fight for their independence and freedom as ordinary criminals. So, dare I venture to the field and say, the United States of America, the Black Panthers you have in jail, at that moment, the African Union would have considered your legislation, would have condemned it, because these are people you have put behind bars because they're fighting for their people's freedom, because you're an oppressive system. All right, now that I have vented about that, moving on to Nkrumah.
No. I think we should spend some time on that. That's important.
Go on, Alimadi.
Because that meeting was infiltrated. And first of all, let me backtrack a little bit. I highly recommend this book.
Yeah.
If you're to buy one book this year, if that's the only book you can buy, this is the book you should buy if you really love Africa. I love the UK cover as well, which is slightly different from Sister Nduku's. I have the version with Sister Nduku's. This book was written by somebody who really loves and cares for Africa to the core, you know? And you would not even be aware that it was actually not written by an African as we define Africa, you know?
And not a man.
Written by a European African who is more African than many Africans I know.
Yeah.
You know,
can say that again.
In spirit, in soul, in compassion, and dedication for Africa. This book shows that meeting that you referred to had been infiltrated by Western establishment.
Yes.
They had their agents there monitoring and even trying to undermine the outcome of this meeting. So I'm glad you actually picked on that chapter. Now, that part that you read, look at the language, trying to be accommodating. But to what extent were they trying to be accommodating? Saying, referring to those who retaliate against the violence. So in other words, you're being told that if you're being oppressed, you know, you can't do anything unless violence is being inflicted upon you. Then yes, you can retaliate against that violence. So in other words, you can't say, why should we tolerate colonialism and imperialism? Why don't we sit together collectively and plot, you know, how to commit the first strike against colonialism, But you say, oh, no, 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 let's wait until they actually commit violence against us, because I'm sure by the way they are writing that, they were not acknowledging the colonialism itself as an act of violence. They are sort of thinking, okay, if they send colonial police and armed forces and they commit, like shooting something, then you can retaliate against that. And then we would not see that as a crime, you see? So it's amazing to what extent they were being forced to fine-tune the language, which shows you under how much tremendous pressure they were trying to prevent them from creating the Africa that they really wanted to do.
And that's happening today. You see the United States of America and the United States of America, I'm sorry, but you're the ones who are putting yourselves out here. I can't help myself but to come for you. You see them putting pressure in the West on African countries now for not siding with them against Russia when it comes to the Ukraine and Russia matter, I will call it. So it's still happening today. And I will say, just as the chapter says, hands off Africa.
Yeah.
Hands off Africa. Let Africa govern itself. If you indeed believe in democracy, let them be a democratic nation. Adesoji, I see you itching to say something.
I would say, no. Before Fanon gave his speech, the speech that came before it is key to the context of why Fanon gave his fiery speech. Fanon came on, he didn't speak English, he spoke French. So, but in the prior to him getting on there, the question was why are we speaking in hushed tones if we're amongst each other? So that was why he came with that fervor.
Right.
And again, Fanon just sort of embodies what the people on the street wanted, as opposed to what the elites who have the ears of the people are actually saying. Because after that speech, the tone of the conference actually changed from one of just chin to the point of, now we have to take it down. How do we do it? How do we practicalize it? And it's not a final point, but just to drive the point home, it will show that even if you're conciliatory, you still have a target on your back. Tom Mboya will die 2 years after that conference.
We played a big part in the conference, and yes.
So it goes to tell you that it doesn't matter the fact that you're not seen to be one of them, you'll be gotten rid of any which way. And how did they do it? They pulled his security detail. He even knew, because he started screaming, where's my police? Where's my protection? Where's my protection?
Yeah.
And 24 hours later, the guy was dead.
Funny thing, as an aside, as we talk about Ghana, I just came back from vacation visiting at home, and I found out that
not everybody knows that home is where.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kenya, visiting Kenya. And I found out that my grandfather and Tom Mboya were good friends, which led me into a rabbit hole where I visited the Kenya archives to do some more research on my grandfather, a story to be told later. And for those of you in the audience who are members of our Patreon family, you'll get to see the videos of my interviews with my father, my uncle, and other Kenyans on some of the history in Kenya. But moving on to Ghana, back to Ghana, Nkrumah was a big proponent of industrializing Africa. He gets in, like I said, the second year after independence, he's holding a conference uniting all countries in Africa for liberation. And then he comes in with this big project, the Volta Project. Brother Adesoji and Brother Milton, could you please speak on the Volta Project? The plan and the challenges he faces, and then what happens eventually with it.
I will yield to Brother Milton first.
Okay, well.
Come swinging, Brother Milton. Come swinging, please.
Oh, no, I think Nkrumah realized that we could not really create prosperity in Africa so long as we continue selling what they call primary materials or raw materials to the West to use in their factories and then sell the manufactured products back to us at inflated prices. That, in fact, was the essence of colonialism. Colonialism became imperative to the Europeans after industrialization from 1760 to 1840, when most of them industrialized and they realized that the African continent has abundance of all the raw materials they need for their factories, number one. Number two, they have Africans that they can enslave and have them become the source of cheap labor. And then number three, they would become consumers for the manufactured products because they would ensure that Africa never industrialized. So would always have to import manufacturers from Europe. That was at the end of the 19th century when they colonized Africa. They had the Berlin Conference, November 1884 to February 1885. They set up the regime, which sadly, tragically, still exists today in Africa. There's not a single industrialized African country today. We import all our manufactured products. We even import clothes, textiles.
I was very saddened to see a lot of what Kenyans call mtumba, second-hand clothes.
Second-hand
in Kenya,
clothes.
they're everywhere.
Imagine when all the cotton grown in African countries, some of the best cotton in the world. And this is what Nkrumah wanted to change. He said, in order to create wealth and prosperity, we need to use our raw materials by building our own factories that use these materials so that we can manufacture for our domestic economy and to be able to also export and compete with the rest of the world in exporting value-added products, not the raw materials that go into the factories. Imagine, you get an iota of the value of whatever is produced in an African country.
Yeah.
Whether the ingredient goes into making the smartphones, whether it goes into making the computers, the automobiles, the pharmaceuticals, the airplanes, you name it, anything manufactured. The ingredient comes from an African country, and yet by the time they send it back to us, we're paying 10, 50, 100 times more relative to the value of the commodities that we export.
Yeah.
So he said, my plan is to build the hydroelectric energy plant using the power from the Volta River, and then use that to build electricity for the whole country, for neighboring countries, and to feed the power to the factories that would allow us to industrialize. So he went to the West to get the money. And ultimately, he struck. First of all, the British had agreed to pay for the project. But then after World War II, Britain was no longer a superpower, really. Britain was broke.
They're broke.
So they said, we can't pay for this. So he went to the United States and he partnered with Kaiser Aluminum. And they agreed to build the smelter, and Kaiser would benefit by producing aluminum cheaply and profit from that. And of course, the West realized that now that he needs the money to build the project, we can use that as leverage to control the politics of Ghana. And we can discuss some of the specifics into how they use that dependency to undermine and ultimately to get rid of him at some point in the future.
I actually,
brother.
yes, we have a few things that we have a memo that we're going to read in a few minutes after Brother Adesoji shares, just that will give insight to the background conspiring and manipulating that the West does to sabotage Africa. For those of you who ask yourselves, why is Africa not standing up against the West? You might get some understanding. Brother Adesoji.
Yes. So to understand the issue of power, you have to have a look at one of the geological maps of Africa. And you see the way the rivers go into Africa. They usually start at a high point. There are 7 major rivers in Africa. of all those 7 rivers, only 2, in my mind, have been dammed. Only 2. River Niger, which the Kanji Dam on it, which is in Nigeria, still grossly underutilized. The new dam coming up on the Nile in between Egypt and Ethiopia, the subject of another entire episode on itself, the geopolitics in that. The Volta Dam would have been one that would have set Ghana at that time on the path to industrialization. And I must emphasize that word, industrialization. Because the thing about power is, if you have light, 24 hours basically becomes
irrelevant.
Irrelevant, exactly. You could go into the lab any time of the day and conduct research. You could, so many things, hospitals, libraries, farming, the idea of science in itself, technology. When China was going to industrialize, it built the Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze River. It moved literally about, it moved about 40,000 villages out of the way to ensure that that dam goes ahead. And the moment that dam did, look at where China is today. China is basically the factory of the world. They produce everything from aircraft bodies to pins, to safety pins, to matches. So imagine if Ghana had done that in the 60s. But they knew. And so they stymied that idea and eventually crushed it. So now, recently, the president, Nana Akufo, was reaching out to the West. Oh, you guys come back and invest in Ghana. He wouldn't have had to do that if, we'll speak about that also, the guys who helped champion the cause of the West in Ghana on February 24, 19, it's mind-boggling. It's just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
And just to show, there are a few memos mentioned in the videos, and as you continue to speak, I'll try and find the videos and share them in the chat that we all were looking at as we did our research. But it is shown that there are communications happening behind closed doors between the State Department, the head of the CIA, lovely fellas, against Ghana, unbeknownst to them. And a good example is a memo I'm about to read that just goes to show you how the interference from the West has put Africa in a position that is, I don't know how we are going to get out of it. And a few conferences will be needed to come up with some resolutions to deal with this issue, and to force the West to take its hands off Africa. So this is a memorandum that is shared from the President's Special Assistant Rosto to President Johnson in 1967. They're speaking about Chairman Nkrumah of Ghana. And a couple of places I'm going to read. It's a long. I'm going to share the link in the chat. It's a long memo. I can't read all of it, but a couple of places I'm going to read. One of them is military aid. And he says, Nkrumah might say he needs, wait, hold on 1 minute, actually. I wanted to share it so that you can all see it with me. So just bear with me. There we go. Share. Let's see whether I'm sharing it. Yes, I am. Let me go back to it. There we go. So this is where I am looking at, if you can all see that. Military aid. Nkrumah might say he needs military aid to ensure against an Nkrumah comeback, to defend against the threat he puts that in quotes, of
Mhm.
Soviet MiGs now in Guinea, Mali, and Nigeria, and to raise the low morale of his army. You might say that we understand Ankrah's security concerns, but the whole range of arms aid is now a terribly tough business on the Hill. We're not even sure we'll have any authority to make credit sales. I'll go to the economy because this is where they mess up Nkrumah as far as the Volta project goes. Economic assistance. Ankrah will be telling you the job of reconstruction is only started and that he needs more economic assistance in the years ahead. He says he will not present you with a shopping list, but he will give you some indication of what he will need. This year, a group of donors led by IMF underwrote Ghana's foreign exchange with nearly $100 million. Our share was one third. The World Bank estimates that Ghana will need $100 to $125 million in aid each year for at least the next 5 years if Nkrumah's damage is to be undone. You might say, don't forget, this is Nkrumah's damage that the West has caused. They're not even admitting that they're the ones who caused the damage. Anyway, we're pleased by Ankrah's belt-tightening economic policy. We're I'm sorry. It's hard not to laugh when you read these things.
Mm.
We are certainly aware of the political costs and risks of such policies. We'll try to hold up our end of the aid effort, though the current atmosphere on the Hill makes it impossible to make any guarantees. We'll also keep after the other donors. We've just released the second half of our 20 million program loan authorized by the president in May. This accurately reflects our confidence in Ankrah and in Ghana. Just gives you a small taste of what is
Mhm.
going on behind closed doors. So,
Right.
Brother
Well,
Adesoji, Brother Milton, if you want to add anything on that, as I catch my breath and get over the.
no, that is the definition of imperialism
Imperialism.
and neocolonialism. This was referring to Joseph Ankara, the General Joseph Ankara, one of the generals that led the coup against Nkrumah. Um, there's another memo that was also outlining how they can help. This was in 65, the memo I'm referring to, how they can help the police and the military overthrow Nkrumah. They referred to the Volta project. They said the World Bank has already approved lending, but that one way they could put pressure on Ghana was to let the World Bank slow down the disbursement of the money. And then they say if that were to happen, there would be pressure on Ghana's economy.
Yep.
And then the people of Ghana would resent Nkrumah. And then the police and the military would overthrow him.
Yeah.
And
For
of course,
those Africans who think the West is so good, it's helped you so much.
and that's exactly what happened. And that memo is available on the archival website of the State Department. And in another memo, it could be related to the one you read from, before Ankara arrived to meet with President Johnson, the president was advised that Ankara is so pro-West that he's actually a bit concerned by your Vietnam policy. And he may ask you, why are you not even using nuclear weapons to get it over with, So this is the type of individual
Talk about psychopaths for
that they
leadership.
put in place to replace Nkrumah. So that pretty much sums up neo-colonialism and imperialism. And
Yes.
let me add one other point. When Nkrumah published his book, Imperialism, the last stage of, Neo-colonialism, the last stage of imperialism. I think Brother
Brother
Adesoji,
Adesoji, hold it up, please.
Aha,
Yes.
there you go. And he outlined the need for United States of Africa in order to resist imperialism. When that book came out, the State Department sent an official letter of protest to the Ghanaian government.
Come closer, Adesoji, sorry.
Because Nkrumah
There you
published
go.
that book. Number one. Number two, they suspended $25 million in assistance to Ghana, whose value today is well over like 300 million. So you would get the magnitude just because he wrote that book. So that book is another book that if you're going to buy another book this year, in addition to Susan Williams, that should be the other book that you buy.
Yeah. Pull out your wallets and your checkbooks. for
Yes.
the if you still use checkbooks. Um, I'm looking at the time. We're running out of time, but I do want to talk a little bit more about the Volta project and what's going on around Africa that Nkrumah gets involved in that makes the West sabotage the project. But before we do that, I'd like to remind you all in the audience, first of all, thank you so much for joining us, but also remind you to please support us by joining our Patreon community at patreon.com/Kumbukeni, and or by joining our YouTube, subscribing to our YouTube channel by clicking on the button on the bottom of the screen. Yes, and joining us in these conversations, because myself, Brother Adesoji, like I was saying, this is what it takes to come up and have these conversations and present good shows, informative, accurately informative shows to you all. This is one of the books, and you can see how big it is that just me, Nduko, covered. You don't even want to see the ones Brother Adesoji looked at and Brother Milton. That's the other one. You see how big that is, and that's the other one, with a full-time job and many other responsibilities. So in order for that, for us to dedicate more time to read and present this information to you all, please support us so that we can put more time to doing this work for our people and not working for the capitalist system that continues to oppress us. Brother Adesoji, Nkrumah, while he's building this dam and negotiating back and forth, sending representatives to the US to negotiate with Kaiser. And there's actually a funny story. The MP, was he an MP? The Minister of Finance
The Minister of Finance.
Yeah, he's there negotiating this when the incident happens in the US, right?
Yes.
So quickly share that before I ask my question. That's a funny story.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Minister Raymond goes to Washington. On his way, he stopped, as any traveler will, he stopped for orange juice. And he was told that I've forgotten the name of the restaurant now. I think
Howard
it's
Johnson.
Howard Johnson.
Milton will never forget.
And he was told very nicely that no, we cannot serve you orange juice. What? And he looks around. There are people who are of less status than I am. Why can't you? Oh, because you're the wrong color. What?
Yep.
And so he would go to the White House, the State Department, and in meeting he would bring that up in a press conference, and that's how the idea of what they wanted to do with regards to the dam came about, and that became a subject matter to which, as they will say, the rest is now history. Unfortunately, that dam is still underutilized. Can you imagine what will have happened if you can really, really bring that dam? Because basically they built it, but they had to downsize it.
Right.
So, which in itself means you start with thinking you want a tractor, and all of a sudden the only thing you got was the front wheels. So I mean, of what use is that to Ghana as a country?
Right. Even though, comrade, if we look at anything that the Ghanaian leadership has ever built in Ghana, even though it's underutilized, even though it was underbuilt, it's still the best thing that he ever did for the country. They got rid of him and they could not produce anything of that
after,
magnitude.
Yeah. Yes.
So the thing I was getting at is the conflict in Congo that is happening at the same time. The Russians are there. There's a cold war that is starting in that area, and at the same time, pressures are being put on Nkrumah to pick a side. So, brothers, if you want to, and he's still negotiating the Volta project. If you want to talk a bit about that.
So yes, Brother Patrice Lumumba was losing patience with the people in his country, and he was He went to the United States. He wasn't given audience. He will go back home, and there was lots of political backstabbing, and he was about to lose his rancor, and he looked to Ghana and he said, the Ghanaian ambassador is not putting his full weight behind his effort to unify the country, to put Congo on a better state. Nkrumah called him over and explained to him, listen, you are basically in the jaws of the lions at the moment. And he showed him papers. I will talk about the papers later, but he showed him papers asking him, you have to be much more savvy about the way you go about it. Unfortunately, by the time Lumumba got back, target was already on his back. 6 months later, after that meeting, he will be dead, which is unfortunately how African story has already played out. It's a theater of horrors.
Yeah, these incidents keep coming up as we talk about the different topics on Africa. We should dedicate a show just for this. The West's efforts in stopping the freedom fighters, the role the CIA plays in killing them and taking them
That's a good
out.
idea. That's a
Well,
good
that,
topic.
well, that's the subject of two books actually. That's the subject of this book.
The same one we were talking about,
Yeah,
yes.
that's the subject of this book. It's also the subject of Washington's Bullets, a book by Vishay Prashad. I'm looking at it as I speak, but I can't reach for it. So those two books essentially will tell you what the CIA is about. And there's a very old book actually. What's it titled? Something along. It was written by an ex-CIA operative.
Yeah.
In
And
Search of Enemies.
In Search of Enemies, that's the book. Yes.
Yeah. Stockwell is his name.
Yes, In Search of
See,
Enemies.
I am one privileged lady to get to hang out with these
Yeah.
brothers every now and
So,
then. I
that
will never be lacking of information. So
no, that book
I am
was
grateful.
that book is
Yep. That book really exploded
Oh
all
my
their
God.
secrets.
Exactly. So much so that they sued him and basically said,
That's just
you said it's okay that I should write it. You didn't but we didn't know you were going to go into this. Come on.
so here's the thing. As we continue to do this work, and we know that some of us will be labeled criminals, troublemakers. We might end up joining our sister Asata in Cuba, hopefully not. But this is what happens. What we are talking about is exactly what the US is running around the world talking about: human rights. That is what you talk about. That is what you claim that the United Nations stands for. And then when we get on screens, when we write books, when we get on pulpits, on podiums to talk about freedom and how you're oppressing us, we become criminals. And I'm sorry, Brother Adisoja and Brother Milton, that I'm detouring, but it's very frustrating that as the one of the oppressed, you can't even stand up to say, hey, get your knee off my neck.
Yeah. It's
That in itself is a criminal act according to them. And then you have your own people, black people, who say, come on, shut up, Nduko. You're making too much noise for the Mzungu. Let him be.
no, but the amazing thing with truth is that it's very liberating. You see, I had many people might be familiar with the late Gil Noble. He had a show on Channel 7 called Like It Is. And what I like about his show, he would bring historians like Dr. Ben, like John Henry Clark, like Ivan Van Sertima, like Professor Leonard Jeffries, and talk about history and the connection with Africa, you see? And he is a very enlightened person. People could tell that. His show was very popular. In fact, how popular was his show? I was privileged to be a guest a few times. Let me give you two quick examples. One day, I'm sitting on the subway, riding from downtown, coming up to Harlem. I see this lady, watching me like,
Like a hawk.
and so I'm like, oh,
Let me sit
maybe,
back.
maybe I'm not a bad looking person after all. And then she gets up and she comes. She says, "Brother, may I sit next to you?" I said, "Wow." I mean,
Okay.
I knew New York was aggressive, and there are empty seats around. I said, "Sure, sister." She sat next to me. She said, "Brother, I feel so honored because I see you on Like It Is."
Mm.
Wow. I said, "Yeah, I thought you were coming to me for me."
Alimadi,
And let me
Alimadi
give you the
was like,
second one. The second one, I entered a bus and I'm about to pay, and the bus driver blocked the slot.
oh.
I looked at him puzzled. He said, "Anyone who appears on Like It Is does not pay on my bus."
Mm.
Okay, so let me give you now why I'm telling this story. Gil Noble, most enlightened, told me this when we were sitting in his office having a chat. He said, "Brother, I was not always like this." He said, "I used to go to listen to Malcolm in the 60s, but I would stand in the back because I didn't want people who knew me in other circles to see me nearby. I would stand at a distance. But the more I heard of him, the closer I would come every week, the closer I would come. Eventually, I found myself standing in the front." So the message is that the truth is very liberating. And so long as we keep dropping truth, our people, even the ones that are hesitant right now, they'll come closer and closer and closer.
Yeah.
That's the message.
And just another aside as we move on now to the next leader that we want to talk about. I was thinking this morning as I was preparing for today's show, because these are thoughts that we're human beings that cross our minds as we jump into this work, the risks that we are taking. And I'm thinking to myself, all we are doing as Africans is fighting for our continent, our nations, our people, our parents, our friends. I just came from a Kenya that is experiencing drought, that has been experiencing drought for 2 years. And a lot of that is man-made by imperialists. A lot of that is man-made by GMO companies, where you have Kenyan families that don't have food. You went to certain areas, there was irrigation and food in plenty. You wouldn't even believe you're in the same Kenya. So if we had that kind of mindset in Africa, where we're thinking of our people, where something like that can be taken and expanded throughout Africa, teaching irrigation and how you can grow food even when there's no rain, things like that. But I digress. We've talked about Nkrumah and another leader in Ghana who makes some huge changes, who actually fixes the issue. Fixes the issue. You hear it coming, Adesoji, huh? Fixes the issue with the dam, because Kaiser negotiates a very ridiculous price. They actually basically steal from Ghana. They cheat them into a ridiculous deal.
For electricity.
And yes, brother Jerry Rawlings, ancestor Jerry Rawlings, is the next leader in Ghana that we're going to touch on. And to our audience, please put your questions in the chat. If you want to jump in and join us on stage, feel free to do so. I just gave our email there, kumbukeni1@gmail.com. Send us an email with your contacts and we'll invite you up. But Brother Adesoji, Brother Milton, please speak on our brother Jerry Rawlings. That is a tongue twister. How does his leadership affect Ghana?
You want to go ahead, comrade?
Look at
You go first. You go first.
Okay.
You go first.
All right. So when Rawlings comes to power, when was the first time? Was this
Should I get my
79?
drum? Is this one of those moments?
Yes, of course. When it comes to power, Ghana has been drifting since the 1966 coup. A series of military takeovers, finding themselves, for whatever complaints they had against Nkrumah, successively doing worse than anything Nkrumah had done. there's a great disaffection from the public about these recurrent coups. By the time Rawlings takes power, the economy is completely adrift. You have shortage of all types of basic commodities. The currency is virtually
Worthless.
worthless. Inflation is skyrocketing. Obviously, this is not the Ghana, the proud Ghana of the 1950s and 1960s. Before Rawlings actually comes into power, the coup attempt fails. So he's arrested and he's tried. So, obviously, before they execute the person, they want to be seen as conducting a free and fair trial.
Yeah.
So they have an open court trial. It's even televised and it's on radio. And they make the mistake of allowing Rawlings to speak. And he did the same thing that Castro did many years earlier. Remember, Castro was also captured.
And then was
the
allowed
plan was
to
to execute him, but he spoke at his trial so passionately. Even the people who are meant to kill him could see this person really loves our country. So he was instead imprisoned. He was released. He went into exile in Mexico and came back on a small boat, and the rest is history. In the case of J. Rawlings, they allowed him to speak as well. And people could tell that this man truly loves this country.
Ghana, yeah.
And he said, yes, kill me. But these people who joined me in this conspiracy, let them go, let them live. It was I who got them involved. Even the people who are supposed to try him are now saying, what kind of character is this? And of course, the public listening to this said, oh, no. We can't allow this guy, a person like this, to be killed. So when they put him in the jail, waiting to be executed, young officers in the army broke him loose. They rescued him and said, no, you're going to lead the country. And that's how he got into leadership. Ironically, the same thing with Sankara.
Sankara, yes.
Thomas Sankara.
The same way.
And funny, the two of them have a relationship.
Loose by Campaure, the one who later on betrayed him, actually killed him. But he was also because people were not willing to have him executed. The same thing. So Rawlings comes there, and the rest is history. He sort of steers Ghana back in the right direction, and whatever abuses that people may feel entitled to heap upon him, I think it's undeniable that without that intervention, Ghana would have continued to be adrift. And to his credit, he yielded power ultimately and gave it to civilians and lived to see even his own party get defeated in elections and power being transitioned from one successive civilian government to the next.
Yes.
So Ghana is at a much better space, even with all the problems they have today. They have a lot of problems, but compared to many African countries, they're in a better space. Compared to where they were in 1979, they're at a better space.
Brother Adesoji, Jerry Rawlings.
Yeah, Jerry Rawlings, Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings, the gentleman in the army fatigue.
Was he gentle? No?
Oh my God! In university, I had a full body poster of him on my wall. So that even my friends would come in and be like, "You're just a rabble rouser." So because
no, they were saying, "Are you hinting at something for Nigeria?"
Listen,
he was hinting in a very loud way because he did. I mean, to be fair, he put Ghana on a proper setting.
He did,
just like you said. Yeah, people might say, well, there were excesses, but sometimes, in order to see clearly, you have to remove the cobwebs from your. You have to remove the cobwebs, and the cobwebs he did. Now, what did Rawlings do that was very important in Ghana? To me, it was the idea that not only did he tell people that this country belongs to them,
Yeah.
it's one thing for you to lead a country and just automatically assume that the people understand what it is to be part of a country. Rawlings embodied Ghana. I mean, for the ladies at the time, he was easy on the eye. He spoke well. He wore he carried his side on anywhere he goes. He was ready to,
Good
you know,
catch.
exactly. And there's in one of his one documentary like that, The Africans, where he was teaching people how to shoot. Come on, man, put your body in it. That was his, and but more importantly, which is where he came in with Sankara, was the fact that when Sankara was in power for that 4 years, Rawlings was the only leader in West Africa that spoke to Sankara. That is shocking.
Yeah.
He was the only leader. In fact, Sankara in his book said anytime he sees Rawlings, it's like seeing a lost brother.
Yeah.
So, to the fact that when he died, Rawlings literally cried. It's like, what is wrong with these people? So Ghana has been blessed with two great leaders. I mean, most African countries could only boast of one or maybe half a leader.
Yeah.
Some places. But Ghana has had two. Forget the chappie that is there at the moment. It's just a placeholder. But that's a matter for another day. But
We need to keep friends in Ghana, Adesoji.
yes,
Tread
I know.
lightly.
But truth be told, those two, Nkrumah and Rawlings. Nkrumah for his philosophy, for his idea, and dare I mention this, he's about the only leader that has a body of books.
Hold that thought so that we can come to it. Do not give away that information yet.
That has
Finish up on Rawlings.
So going back to Rawlings, and this is going to, some people will understand this, and when there was a tit for tat between Nigeria when they were sending their quote unquote illegal immigrants back and forth, where the phrase Ghana must go comes into play, Rawlings was not vindictive. Rawlings, in fact, embraced the people, engaged them immediately. Like, okay, you're back. How can we help you settle? Unlike other leaders where they would just basically, oh, that's a problem, we'll deal with it. No, how can we get these people to settle? And so that framework is what Ghana is building up today. And there I mentioned, he also survived 2 CIA coup attempts. So again,
the CIA has been very active in Ghana. I think Nkrumah had a bunch of them against him as well.
So again, yes, So Rawlings, flowers to him. He's late now, and he's the guy who went before him, Kwame Nkrumah. Those two in the pantheon of leaders, of African leaders, in fact, Nkrumah did say it. What's the role of Ghana if other African countries are not free?
Yes.
And those two embodied it.
Yeah.
Those two embodied it.
Great men. And we hope that the African leaders that are there now can embrace that spirit. We hope that you're taken over by the spirits of Nkrumah and Rawlings. But speaking of Nkrumah, as we jump towards the end, I do want you to share about his writings. But also, before we do that, Nyerere pops in, Brother Milton.
Yes.
Alimadi. Our brother Julius Nyerere pops in the Nkrumah story. Please speak on that.
Well, Nyerere of course, was at the inaugural meeting of the Organization of African Unity in Addis Ababa in 1963, when Nkrumah said, unity now, we unite or we will perish. And sadly, we have been perishing for many years. Nyerere happened to be in the group that supported gradual moves toward unity, not immediate moves toward unity. And I'm not suggesting that he was also influenced by the Western countries. To some degree, possible. But many Africans leaders at the time were actually influenced by Western countries to oppose Nkrumah's call, urging for immediate United States of Africa. And subsequently, they were divided into two camps, the so-called Casablanca camp that supported African countries that supported immediate unity, and the Monrovia
Group,
which were the ones supporting gradual move toward unity.
We had the Brazzaville as well, right?
Yeah, there was a third, but these were the major ones.
Okay.
They too.
Okay.
The Monrovia included major countries like Nigeria, actually.
There you go, brother Adesoji. Your cousins. Your cousins. No shame you don't want African unity.
But to his credit, many years later, after Nkrumah had been deposed, after Nkrumah had joined the ancestors, Nyerere had paid a state visit to Ghana. And he made a speech in the parliament. And he acknowledged, he said, I made a mistake. Kwame Nkrumah was correct. It called for immediate African unity. He said, as the years have passed on, we become used to our own independent national anthems being called Mr. President, Excellency.
Your Excellency. What does
our
that
own
mean?
State houses, having our own currency, all these symbolisms of statehood, when in fact, the essence of statehood and sovereignty is not there because there's no power. He said, so we made a mistake, and I acknowledge Kwame Nkrumah was correct. And Nyerere, also to his credit, he did leave behind a body of works, which I also recommend. Some are not easier to get. But he wrote Freedom and Socialism, Freedom and Development, Ujamaa, Essays on Socialism, Man and
Slow
Development.
down on those, Brother Milton. Start over and slow down, please. I'll try and type as fast as possible.
Yeah, Freedom and Socialism, Freedom and Development, Ujamaa, which is a Kiswahili word for like a collective familyhood, UJAMAA, and then the subtitle is Essays on Socialism.
Essays, okay.
Yeah, and then the other book is Man and Development. And he also wrote a translation of The Merchants of Venice. In Kiswahili, Mabepari wa Venice, that he translated from Shakespeare.
Venice, he spelled with an S, right, in Kiswahili?
Yes.
Venice. Yeah. Venice without an E. All right. There we go. Those are books by Julius Nyerere. Brothers, as I type this, quickly, please talk about our brother Kwame Nkrumah's wealth of books and knowledge that he imparted on us, please.
Okay. I'm fortunate enough to have 12 of them.
Hold them one by one as you speak.
Okay. The most important one, if you're going to get any of his books, please get this one.
Yes. 100%. Yes.
Get this.
Neo-colonialism, the last stage of imperialism.
Move it to the center. Come this way. There you go. That's much better. That's where you need to be. Okay.
Yeah. Subsequently, if you want to add to that, you can add this.
Africa Must Unite.
Africa Must Unite. Move it again towards your left. There
Yep.
you go.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
That is a book I recommend to every African president today. Please buy that for yourself and your cabinet
I can't let you see the inside scribbles. It's been damaged by scribbles.
and your whole government.
And this is one of his pamphlets.
The struggle continues.
The struggle continues. Yeah.
Which Samora Machel popularized as a luta continua.
Continua, Victoria Seta. And
that's a big deal. That's a big deal when you think about the fact that a lot of these coups are because of that elite class siding with the West, the neo-colonialists.
So there's
struggle in Africa.
Class struggle in Africa. There is this, a voice from Conakry.
Yes, Conakry is, of course, where he was in exile in Guinea. Conakry is the capital of Guinea.
So these are speeches he gave. He did a radio show every other Thursday. And this is a compilation of the speeches he gave on that show.
And he did most of his writing while in Guinea, right?
In exile. But he wrote Neocolonialism when he was still president.
When he was still president, yes. And this is a book on philosophy, Conscientism by Kwame Nkrumah. There are others, but I can't lay my hands on them at the moment. But because we're researching for the program, and I knew this was going to come in handy, so I brought this out. Others are Rhodesia File. There's Rhodesia File. There is wait a second. Why am I straining myself? So aside from the ones I showed you, there is Axioms of Kwame Nkrumah. That's a book of his quotes, his major quotes. It's a very small book, but brilliant.
Said it's Axioms of Kwame Nkrumah.
Axioms of Kwame Nkrumah. There is I Speak of Freedom. There is What I Mean by Positive Action. And of course, Dark Days in Ghana.
You're right.
In fact, if you are going to get any other book aside from the first two, which is Africa Must Unite, and Neocolonialism, Last Stage of Imperialism, you get Dark Days in Ghana.
As always, brothers, we're running out of time. We can talk about Kwame Nkrumah all day, and the rabbit hole, the whole rabbit holes that come from him, the different people he influences in the US. You know what? Quickly talk about the different people he influences in the US. That was so much fun reading about that. The people he invites there. I remember. I think it was John Henry Clark. I believe it was Dr. Clark, who was given a job in he says he goes to visit. Yeah, he goes to visit, and Dr. Clark is funny when you listen to him in the videos. He goes to visit Ghana, and he runs out of money or something like that. A check he was expecting does not come through, and therefore he's stranded there, and he's on the streets walking, and there's a parade, and Nkrumah notices him and pulls over his presidential car and asks him, "What are you doing in my country, man?" And Dr. Clark explains why he's there, and Dr. Clark explains he's broke and he was expecting a check and it didn't come. And then Nkrumah gives him an assignment to write in a magazine, right? Or something like that.
The evening news.
Yep.
The journalist.
Yeah. But he connects with others. Speak on that, please.
And he also gave the job of writing the African Encyclopedia to W.B. Du Bois. So W. Du Bois would unfortunately not been able to finish it, to the fact that he was crying because he couldn't do it and he couldn't finish it. And Nkrumah said, "Well, you've started the most important, which is the most important aspect of it, and then someone else would take it up." And
do we know what happened to that project?
I'm not sure if it was ever completed.
We should look into it. We can all volunteer to support with that.
So, and then there is what's his name? Malcolm X. Malcolm X also was a regular visitor to Ghana.
We should do a session just on him and Africa. Yeah.
Malcolm X was a regular visitor to Ghana. There was but the person he regularly converses with was Stokely Carmichael,
Yeah.
otherwise known as Kwame Ture. In fact, in this book, Kwame's letters, there's a letter written by Kwame Ture to series of letters back and forth between both of them about what they need to do, in fact, in terms of liberation of African Americans and how he can support the movement.
Yeah.
And then most importantly was the fact that when Ghana was getting independence, he invited lots of African Americans, Fannie Lou Hamer, I mean, a whole host of them.
The Robisons, he
Dr.
talks
King.
about them.
Dr. King, I mean,
yeah.
So
for the Africans on the U.S. continent who are rejecting that connection with the African continent, hey, I'm just telling you.
Listen to a speech that Dr.
The ancestors
King
have sealed it. It's fate. The connection will be there no matter what powers try to prevent it. Brother Adesoji, go on. I just could not resist saying that.
So yes. So at the meeting highlighted in Miss Susan Williams' book, when Nixon will turn to an African-looking man and say, "Oh, it must be wonderful for you to be free." And the man retorts to him without missing a bit, "Well, I want to know what it means because I'm from Montgomery, Alabama."
Yep.
So it goes to show you that there are linkages that people are making. And now Ghana is basically one of in fact, is the only, I would say, is the major, is the singular country in Africa that has a very large African-American population.
Yeah. It's leading in that effort as well, welcoming back the descendants of enslaved Africans. It's leading in providing opportunities for them to invest and live, making it easy for them to go there and travel without all these barriers, passports, visas, and all the like. So quickly, we have 2 minutes, and I want to dive into this because of the African unity that Brother Kwame Nkrumah is promoting. How do you think today Africa can unite? What ways, quickly, 30 seconds, and we'll close. What ways can Africa unite today, African nations, and prevent the influence of Western countries?
It's very difficult. They have to, first of all, renounce the World Bank, IMF control. They need a third, because you still need financing to finance projects. That's why we should support that attempt to form the BRICS movement, which includes, Brazil, which includes Russia, which includes South Africa, the India, these emerging economies that want to shed neocolonial control over them. That would have to happen. Without the financing, the political unity becomes very difficult. And then, of course, we need leaders of a new generation, people like Julius Malema, who are talking about a borderless Africa.
Yes,
so we need a fresh core. And also, very quick, I just want to mention that Maya Angelou was also in Ghana.
She was.
And of course, Mrs. Du Bois, Shirley Graham Du Bois.
Brother Adesoji.
Yes. I will start with this. Kwame Nkrumah says, Africa must unite. We have before us not only an opportunity, but a historical duty. I would buttress that by saying unite means, first and foremost, open those borders. There should be flights between most African countries, not interfacing with Europe first before going to.
You mean I shouldn't go to London before I go to Uganda, right next door?
Exactly. Right. So there should be that freedom. If I pick up my passport now, I can go to Spain in 20 minutes. The same thing, you should be able to fly from Nigeria to Tanzania. Why not?
Yeah.
Without a passport.
Without a passport.
Even without a passport.
Yeah, you have an identification yeah, that would be great to see, and we encourage African leaders to work towards that. We encourage the African Union to do something about that.
Actually, I think it would be better to encourage the African people to
African people.
demand it. The leaders, I don't have too much faith in them, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There goes our brother Milton. He has put the charge out there. African people, you have been tasked.
Yep, that is your
Yes.
mission.
So we thank you all for joining us. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Asanteni. Thank you all. Thank you for the contributions in the chat. We ask you to support us again by joining our Patreon community on patreon.com/Kumbukeni. The thing about Patreon is I will be sharing videos of my trip. I had an interview with my father and my uncle. Those will be shared there to our top tiers, and a few videos to the rest of the tiers in our community. You get to see me in Amboseli. You get to see the food that they had there. You get to see the animals and the interactions between the animals. So tourism in Africa through an African's eyes. My point is I'm encouraging you, my brothers and sisters, descendants of enslaved Africans in the United States and elsewhere, to travel to Africa. It is a high time we stop leaving Africa to the white man and white woman and start traveling ourselves to support our own nations. Again, you can support us by also subscribing to our YouTube channel by hitting the button below, subscribe. And we thank you all again. Siku njema. Brothers, your goodbyes.
Aluta continua.
Odaro.
Hey, have a nice day, everyone.